Again, this initiative will generate between $8 and $9 billion a year. These two are in circulation. They have not been issued to go out to the voters for signature yet. The Attorney General is reviewing them. As you recall, the last iteration of Proposition 30, there were three tax initiatives that were circulating, that were initially proposed. There was an initiative proposed by Molly Munger. There was an initiative proposed by the California Federation of Teachers, and then there was the governor's CTA initiative. And through a combination of the legislative process and discussion, they were able to sort of winnow down those initiatives for discussion. It's unclear if there'll be similar discussions. I know that the Education Alliance, which has sponsored this initiative, has tried to initiate discussions with the hospital group and the healthcare workers to see if there's a middle ground that can be taken on these initiatives. Should both initiatives reach the ballot, there's a provision in each one of these initiatives which says that the ballot measure which receives the highest number of votes will be the one that governs. So if there's any conflict between these two, the one that gets the most votes will be the one that will. The other thing I should point out, one reason that the extension of the sales tax was not included in these measures was one that the governor has indicated that he doesn't want a straight extension or renewal of Proposition 30. So in both initiatives, they did something a little bit different to distinguish itself from Proposition 30. The second thing is when they did the polling and focus groups on it, of the tax measures that were listed, the income tax rates for the higher income earners and the sales tax had the least amount of support by the voters. So there was more support on the Proposition 30 income tax type of levies here. I would say that of all the issues that will be coming up in the legislature, this will be the one of the greatest focus for education. The polling right now shows that the support for a tax extension or renewal is about 50, in the low 50s right now. And for those who have worked in initiatives know that to get secure passage of a statewide initiative, you need support right out of the box in the high 60s. And so that means in order to get this sustained to a 50% majority or higher, that they will have to work extra diligently to recruit and secure the votes for passage of the extension. The second issue that will be surfacing is the Fredericks Union Dues Challenge. This is an issue that has made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court and will be heard. The issue here relates to the fair share fees required to be paid for union dues. Under current law, government worker unions are allowed to pay, are allowed to collect fair share fees to cover the cost of collective bargaining. And the collection of fees for political action committees are optional. The Supreme Court challenge, or the case of Fredericks, is a challenge to the fair share fees. And this has made its way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to hear this issue, and we expect a decision to be rendered by the U.S. Supreme Court in fall of 2016. This will have significant implications for collective bargaining if the Supreme Court sides with the plaintiff and the challenge. And labor groups are going to be concerned, and they're going to, as are management groups, are going to be concerned. What are the implications of this court decision, and how will it affect the collective bargaining process? There may be legislation that will be forthcoming during the session to try to implement or to respond to the Fredericks Union Dues Challenge should it go on the side of the plaintiff. So again, it's an issue that you should be aware of because it could affect collective bargaining in the near future. And this, by the way, doesn't just affect education unions, it could affect all labor groups related to collective bargaining with government governmental entity. The third issue is the education facility, the statewide education facilities bond. There was a signature gathering effort to put a $9 billion bond on the November ballot. The signatures are sufficient enough to qualify it for the November ballot. It provides $9 billion in funding, of which $2 billion is earmarked for community college facilities and $500 million is earmarked for career technical education. The concern here is that because it's on the November ballot, they have evidence, policymakers and pollsters have evidence that if you put the education facilities bond and the tax extension on the same ballot, only one measure will pass, and that measure is likely to be the education bond because that's not a direct tax increase. So many education groups and many members of the legislature are concerned about having both measures on the November ballot. There's going to be an effort in January when the members come back to the legislature to produce an alternative education bond proposal to move it to the June ballot. And the issue there, if they want to have the measure moved to a June ballot, it will require a 2/3 vote of both houses of the legislature. As you know, currently, there is not a 2/3 majority in either house of the legislature of the Democrats. So to secure an education facility bond for the month of, for the June ballot will require support of Republicans to make sure this occurs. So it's something to watch for on two levels. One, to see if there's going to be an education bond on the ballot, but also to see which ballot it will appear on, because it could be a threat to the tax initiatives which will take place, which will be likely to be placed on the ballot for November. That concludes my presentation, and I could here pause for if there's any questions or discussion.
Thanks very much. Very interesting. Questions from the board?
I have a question.
Sure. Trustee Zio.
Thank you for that presentation. A couple of things. I'm sorry, I don't think I see a page number, so I think it's the slide where it references next year. It says no major increases. It's the first couple of, yeah, there we go. So is that 2014-15 or is that 15-16?
I meant to be, yeah, 15-16.
Okay.
So, all right.
Great, no problem. So, and then the next slide, this is more a question for our staff. Is this something that will come before us for AB 288 that we will be supporting or voting on as a board to support this or not?
This actually was signed into law, so it's already been signed into law. Second, we had already passed similar legislation, SB 650, several years ago, which the governor signed, and which gave us basically the same authority. So this would just now allow us not to have to go back and renew that authority. Now all community colleges have similar authority to enter into the current enrollment arrangement that we've had with Long Beach Unified.
Okay, great. And on your slide about School Funding and Budget Stability Act of 2016, did I hear you correctly that this was based on a poll? The third bullet, or?
Not completely, but a poll was used to help them decipher what would be the appropriate taxes to continue or for extension. And there were a number of focus groups and polls asking people, which taxes would they be inclined to support and which ones they would be less likely to support.
Do you have stats on how many people were surveyed or how many actually support this tax on, looks like taxing the rich, of 12.3% for $500,000 or more?
I don't have that firsthand. The Education Alliance, which is the collection of California education labor groups, have that. And
okay.
You might ask them for that, but I don't know if they feel comfortable with making it public. But you could, but that's where the work came from, the Education Alliance.
Great. And then on your last slide, maybe this is a question for our staff. On this $9 billion education bond, K through 14, what are some of the things we're doing to maximize our share in getting it? And then given that we may have a recommendation to put a facilities bond on the ballot next year, will we be assessing the impact that this statewide bond measure regarding this extension and a K through 14 education bond will have on the voters' mindset when all three are placed on the same ballot in potentially November 2016?
Yes, so I will work backwards. Certainly the question of what's on any particular ballot and which election that we would be best positioned to go with based on polling is going to be the job of the consultant that you will be considering approval for in the very near future on this agenda. As a matter of fact, right after this issue. So certainly we can pose that question to Catherine Liu. But that is what we're asking them to do, to look at all the issues that are going to be on all the ballots, to consider what the pluses and minuses are. Typically, we are not disadvantaged by going out for a local bond when there's a statewide bond, because one of the clear messages would be that we would leverage state funds for local funds. That's what the approach we made the last couple of times around. The projects that would be included in this ballot measure are already part of our planning process. So the state already collects that information. Those are projects that are already in the queue. There's a question of, because this is a November 16 bond measure, whether or not the plans in the current queue would qualify or whether or not there'd be a chance to modify those. I think that's a question that hasn't been answered yet, at least to my knowledge. I don't know if Vice President Gable has a different answer.
Well, actually, if the bond makes it to the ballot and is approved, the Chancellor's Office has already submitted to the Board of Governors that we would have two projects in the 16-17 year. So that would be our M&N project and our MM project. Would be state funded. Now, the question is whether or not the governor will put it in the budget language. It has to be in the budget language in order for us to get the funding. So that's something that we're working through at the Chancellor's Office level. But right now, what was approved by the Board of Governors, we do have two projects that would be funded with that $2 billion. And then we would have a chance for additional two more projects in the third year of the 4-year bond.
And how much is our share of the $2 billion?
Right now, what has been submitted is about $25 million.
And that's for two projects, or $25 million?
That's for the two projects.
Okay. Total. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? No. Thank you very much for a very thorough presentation, very thought-provoking.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So now we had agreed earlier in this meeting to move part of agenda item 5.6 up to now, and that was the third prong, if you will, that had to do with the Lee Edwards Group. We've got some travel issues that need to be addressed, so I'm going to call that portion of 5.6 that has to do with the Lou Edwards Group at this time. So, Superintendent President Oakley.
So do you want to call for the question, and then we will ask them to answer questions under discussion, because there's no presentation.
Okay. Then I would entertain a motion. So moved by Trustee Archuleta. Is there a second? Second by Trustee Kellogg. And now it's before us. And are there questions?
I have a question on, is this on item 5.6, or is it part of item 5.6?
Part of 5.6.
Okay.
It's the
So we're going to come back
Edwards
to the second part, to the other items on
Yes.
5.6. Okay, so my question on this Lou Edwards group is what's this amount of the not-to-exceed value of $263,000. What's that based on? And is that a cap, or hopefully it's not likely to grow?
Do you want to answer that, Vice President Gable?
Certainly. That is the maximum cost that would be required under this contract. That is assuming that we were to place something on a November ballot. So if we had something placed on a ballot previous to that, the amount would be less. It's also assuming that we would do 2 tracking surveys. The second survey is optional. And then that is assuming 3 informational flyers that would go out. But that's all part of the discussions that would be held with the consultant if we elect to award a contract to the consultant. And we would be basing it on the guidance of the surveys, whether or not informational mailings were required, if we could only do 1, if we needed to do 3. So that is the maximum cost that we would foresee in undertaking if we move forward with this contract.
And what was the optional part of it again, that you mentioned earlier?
The optional part would be doing like a second tracking survey through that would occur, and that's really only if we do a November ballot that we would want to do a second survey closer to the timeline of the ballot to see if the community still felt the same way they did with the initial survey. So that would be, something that it's going to depend on the initial survey, the timing of any proposed bond that may get put on the ballot, that may become before the board for you to place something on the ballot. And if we elected to go with a June ballot date, we probably wouldn't need a second tracking survey, but if we went with November, we would probably need another one.
And how much would it be if it was a June ballot?
How much less?
Yes.
If it was a June ballot, if we didn't do the second survey, it would be about 46,500 less. But we still have the question on if we do 3 mailers or not 3 mailers, so.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all I have.
I have a question, President Otto.
Trustee Baxter.
Yes, hi. I would like to know, so is this an inclusive cost? In other words, the postage and the mailers and the graphing of the responses, that's all included? There are no extras?
There are no extras.
Okay. Secondly,
And the budget is designed to be as flexible and prudent to the district as possible, so that either election option can be implemented under this budget, with the maximum, as the Vice President indicated, being November of next year.
okay. Second question, how do you go about surveying? Do you do mail? Do you do telephone? How do you do it?
Yes, for that, I would like to introduce Dr. Richard Bernard, partner of FM3 Research, who can talk to you a little bit more about survey methodology.
Good evening. It's our proposal that we would use telephone survey to conduct the interviews.
Okay, I've said this before. I ran a campaign. Nobody answers the telephone. Who are you going to talk to who actually answers their telephone?
Well,
And how many people are we talking about?
I think it's safe to say that they won't talk to anybody that doesn't answer the phone.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Otto. Gee, I'm glad you told me that.
Well, it's an excellent question, and I hear this every time I go to a potential client. And they're worried because they say, well, I would never answer the phone, so why do I expect anyone else to?
Right.
The irony is that as we speak, we are getting hundreds of responses to a variety of surveys that we're doing tonight, and as we do on a routine basis. And who we will call is registered voters who are likely to vote in the elections you're interested in. And when they register their telephone numbers.
Remember that I ran for office, and I know this, and so do the rest of us. But what I'm getting at is when
Yeah.
I called those registered voters, I don't mean to be, I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound defensive, but I'm telling you, out of 1,000 phone calls, maybe 10 people answered the phone.
Well, when I started more than a decade ago, it was 40 to 1. We're now at about 75 to 1. But you have to remember, first of all, if they're likely to vote in these elections, they're much more civically minded and much more interested in sharing their opinion. And in fact, in some cases, we can't get people off the phone because no one ever asks them what they think. Now, if I'd be happy to be very specific in how we do this. Now, we take your voter file and we segment it into a variety of demographics. So the principle is, for example, gender, ethnicity, age, party ID, and we get, for simplicity, we get 75 people into a bucket who look virtually alike. Now, not everyone is going to have the exact same attitude, but the history of polling suggests that people like themselves are more likely to think like themselves. And so we call into that bucket, we take one name randomly out at a time, and we call in. And the minute that we have a final response, like someone who responds to the whole survey, we then close that bucket and go on to the next demographic. And the outcome is that the demographics from the survey will nicely match the demographics of the expected population of likely voters. Does that answer your
No, and
question?
that makes perfect sense. So now, how many buckets have you got?
We have a lot of buckets because you have a lot of people.
Well, I represent the
Yeah.
largest voting segment in this city.
Yes.
And so, my people will come out and they will go vote.
Yeah.
But what I found was they were not answering the phone. They would answer the door before they answered the phone.
Well, I don't know too many pollsters that actually physically go to the door and do the surveys. It's kind of dangerous. So we don't get combat.
Don't run for office.
I know. We don't get combat pay. But I can assure you that yours and your colleagues' districts will be well represented. We will make sure that they're proportional to what we anticipate the likely outcome will be.
If I might, just to tie a bow around this conversation, though our organization certainly has the opportunity to work with the best survey research firms in California, we have recommended to the district that this partnership be with FM3 Research, specifically because of their working knowledge of your district boundaries. It is also important that
Excuse me,
we,
I'm sorry, what's the name of the company?
FM3 Research,
M3, okay.
yeah. When I had an initial discussion with President Oakley, understanding the diversity and the unique demographics of your district is very important to us. So as such, we are planning on being able to share information with you transparently in a variety of ways. So we will be comparing the June election to the November election. So we will be able to tell you straightforwardly whether both elections are about the same or one is more favorable than the other. We also will be sharing information with you by trustee area and a variety of other demographics. So we very much want these studies to be comprehensive and fully detailed to enable the board to make a fully informed decision about the next step.
Because I was intimately involved in the last two bond campaigns, every night making phone calls. And people were very positive. You're absolutely right. But,
Yes.
and I hope it's still true.
It is our observation that this district has a very strong tradition of supporting services that you provide and public education in general.
Okay. Thank you.
Trustee Archuleta.
Just a couple of questions. First question is, your survey, your current survey, is that to ask about the best time, where is it, June or November? Is that part of the initial question?
Well, we'll ask a variety of questions. We'll ask about awareness of the college, the perceptions of needs that your voters have about the college. We'll give them some educational statements so that we see if we inform them as to what's going on at the college, whether that will lead to the support. And we'll also ask them conceptually, do you think there is a need for funds? And we'll also, through the survey, ask a placeholder ballot question. So that will give us some kind of sense. And because we have their past voter history, we'll be able to identify if they're likely to vote in one or both of the elections. And we'll be able to segment them out and say the folks who are most likely to vote only in June, well, not only in June, but in June, will look at it like this way. And then the folks who are likely to vote in November look at it a little bit differently or look at it the same. So we'll be able to give you that information.
And my second question, given, the diversity that you just mentioned, will the surveys be done bilingually?
Yes, absolutely. We couldn't, with good conscience, we couldn't do it without that.
Good to know.
I have another question, Doug, if I may.
Trustee Zia.
So are you targeting all voters, or are you targeting high propensity voters who have voted for bond measure in the past X amount of years?
Well, we don't use it in terms of definition based on bond measures, but rather general elections, off-year elections. So we look at how frequently they voted in the X number of elections past. And we also include recently registered voters because we don't want to exclude them. They've come into the district or they've turned 18, and we want to be able to have, if you've just registered, the likelihood is you're excited about the upcoming election. And so we'll incorporate all of those groups.
Okay, so is this, do you have a number of people you're targeting in mind?
Yes, in the initial baseline survey, we anticipate a sample size of 600, which is rather robust. Remember, when statewide surveys are done, usually only about 1,000 respondents are surveyed. So that should give you an excellent sense of
I'm
your
sorry,
viability.
600 in district-wide?
Yes,
600 voters?
Yes.
And that's
600 respondents, yes.
okay. So how many people would you reach out to get 600 respondents?
Again, it may be that we have to call 70 people to get each response. So it would be 70 times 600.
42,000.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know how to multiply. Thanks.
Oh, while I'm thinking about it, just in reference to the preceding discussion to ours, just want to mention very directly to the board that should you select the option of going forward in November, the second tracking survey will also evaluate the effect, if any, of other statewide propositions on the ballot to ensure that we have a very high confidence level of the viability of your measure at that time.
But not the first tracking survey? If you were
Well,
up against
the first baseline survey, we typically want to make sure that we get a good read on your June election. And do remember that most of the statewide propositions now are in November.
Right.
So actually, for all of our community college districts, our protocol is to test the effect of those other ballot measures in the second survey.
I'm just concerned about other bond measures that might be in June.
Yes,
ways.
we are aware of a variety of other measures, including one that is local to you, and we will be evaluating those effects.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
I really didn't, if anyone has any more questions, because I don't, I had really more of the process that went through. The three or four firms were all very qualified. They specialize in this area. I felt very comfortable about the procedure that went through on the review. The firm standing before us right here has if anyone asked, we've all done surveys, but until you see how they do surveys, and I don't mean they particularly, I mean how they do surveys is very different than many people may even imagine. It's a very structured process. This firm, this team, has been in the past very successful. If you want to go to North Orange, this was the team that passed that bond. If you want to go up to Santa Rosa, this is the team that helped pass that and went through the same process and procedures that we're going to go through. And the whole point is to find out what is our best opportunity if we want to move forward with a bond, a local bond, and when is the best time to do it. If we were talking about moving it closer to today, that gives us challenges as well, and that's why we initially said November. It gives us a little bit more time. Time is critical in this area, but as far as the selection of this firm, I'm very pleased. They have as I mentioned, a very high success rate. I think the only one, and it wasn't because of their efforts, was at Napa Valley College. They ran out of money and a lot of other issues, but nonetheless, this firm standing before us, I believe, will really help us find out what are the issues with the local community, how they will do work, and I'm really pleased to move forward and find out what's going to take place with this survey. For people that I know, we talk about surveys in sometimes an abstract way, but good polling, good surveys is really a science. It's just not go call up a bunch of people, and they will give us numbers that you can almost go to the bank with. If they're telling us we are within a certain percentage, I've yet to see these pollsters and this firm miss their marks by much, if any at all. So the question now is, what does our local community want to do? We need to partner with someone. I'm very comfortable with the people that were interviewed, their price, and I think we've got a great team standing before us. And unfortunately, I know at ACCT a few weeks ago you were doing a presentation, and that's another outstanding work there. And you come here with if anyone asks a question about your reputation and your work, it's outstanding. And full disclosure, a gentleman by the name of John Fairbanks did one of my first surveys, when we all done surveys, back in, I believe it was 1986, 87.